specific farm started off originally as a tobacco farm. We've had cattle all the way through, and at the end of the tobacco industry we moved over to avos, and then more latterly out of avos and into macadamias. The average day on the farm, we kick off usually between 6 and 6:30. It's a highly seasonal job, obviously depending on what's happening. If we're harvesting, it's all hands on deck, usually all in one place. At this time of year, now spring, there's a bit of spraying, waiting for the rain, quite a lot of fertilizing. So for macadamias, there's 3 or 4 different cultivars of macadamias on this farm. So we start off with the earlier cultivars. Some of the cultivars drop their nuts when they ripe, and others you have to spray ripening agents to get them off the tree. It's all done by hand here, not mechanically like in other parts of the world. It's a physical job, picking the nuts up, putting them into lug boxes, loading them, and they get then taken through to the processing plant, where we take the husk off and dry them at quite specific temperature and humidity. It takes about a week to get them down to 10% moisture content. Obviously grading out over big sorting tables, taking out anything that is not suitable, size them, dry them, and get them into storage, and then they'll go through to the factory for further processing. So obviously a macadamia's got a husk. We take the husk off, but it's still got a very resilient shell. So that's done by specialized equipment at the factory. There's a nut in shell market. So the nuts are sold with the shell on, so dried down to 2% moisture and packaged into 50-pound bags and shipped out like that. So that obviously brings down the processing cost. The other market is the kernel market. So that would be, you take the shell off. Every nut inside the shell is a perfect round nut, but it's quite an aggressive process taking the shell off. And there is breakage, so you get a style distribution from a big whole nut down to powder. So it's sorting into those 7 or 8 different grades. And there's a very strong market for all the grades, you know, the powders in the baking industry, confectionery, all the way up to the snack market with the big round nuts and half nuts going to trail mix and snacks. The biggest kernel market is United States, but also Europe as well. And yeah, the industry is doing really well. You know, water is a limited variable here for us, specifically in Barberton. It's an irrigated farm. We're too dry in the winter to go without irrigation. There are areas in the country where you can plant macadamias dry land, and it's very successful. So we are dependent on stormwater runoff and dependent on the rivers staying full for irrigation water. I mean, we manage the moisture content in the soil very, very closely all the time. It's a huge part of what we do. The nutrition of the tree comes almost exclusively with the water through fertigation. So it's a double whammy. If you don't have water, it's very difficult to get your fertilizer into the trees as well as getting moisture into the trees. And then the sunlight we get enough of. Obviously you need to manage the tree's size. I think at the moment we've got about 120 hectares planted to macadamias, various ages from 20 odd, the oldest, right down to a couple of months old in the ground. So I think I probably inherited the habit from my father. I mean, we used it back in the tobacco days. It's a product that's stood the test of time. It's a natural product, and I'm a huge believer in it, specifically for root stimulation. We use it a lot as a drench. You know, going into periods where a tree could be stressed, if you're planting into soil that has, for whatever reason, higher disease pressure, a root-borne disease pressure, or going into a particularly dry or particularly wet or particularly cold time of year, it's a great growth stimulant, and I think specifically on the roots. We also spray it onto the trees at more or less this time of year, just after the fruit is set. So it's sort of little pinhead size, so pinhead to about 5 mils will come through with a Kelpak spray, but it sticks quite a lot more fruit onto the tree. A macadamia tree, after it's set its crop, it sets way more nuts than what it can handle, and here around November time the tree is just basically deciding what its ability is, how much of that fruit can it carry to harvest. So it's quite a critical time, and I think to just relieve the stress on that tree, that Kelpak does really well. A lot of what we do is crop protection, you know, especially for that in-shell market. There's quite a few insects that can do some quite significant damage. So it's very easy just to add the Kelpak to one of those crop protection products going through. Yeah, I've definitely noticed a difference. Specifically, you know, a young tree, when you first plant them out, it's quite a shock to the tree system. It's an actual phenomenon called transplant shock. So when it comes out of the nursery in ideal conditions under shade net, goes out into usually a pretty barren field. It's a hot, dry environment when it's getting planted out, so it experiences quite a lot of transplant shock. And those trees specifically, if you do one line with a Kelpak and the next line not, you can see the difference. In terms of fruit set, I saw enough difference to warrant using Kelpak on the whole orchard at least twice a year, and then spot treating stressed trees. Yeah, the Kelpak, you know, if we're spraying it onto the nuts, obviously through mist blower, and then we drench it, mix it up with water and whatever other product you're putting in. Usually Kelpak goes very nicely with micronutrients. And if a tree's under stress for any reason, and it's poured over the root zone with a watering can or out of a tractor with a hose pipe, that's how it's applied. So just pre-blossom, as the blossom extends, it makes a 10 to 15 centimeter raceme. And just before the blossom opens, we try to coincide it with one of the other sprays, and then later on, shortly after fruit set, our next spray will actually have Kelpak in it. Kelpak had a significant improvement on both yield and style distribution, so that's meaning how they crack out, shell versus kernel. I mean, it was a no-brainer. It's a good product, it really is.